I'm Olivia Clementine, and this is Love and Liberation. Today, our guest is Charles Eisenstein. Charles is a writer, speaker, countercultural philosopher, and the author of several books. His newest book, The Coronation, was released in the summer of 2022. What I've noticed with your work is there's a through line of relational interest, like on all realms, like economy, health, ecology. Has that always been an interest for you? Have you always had an interest in the play of interconnection, or was there a moment where you felt like, oh, wow, like relationship is pretty vital for the future I want?
Hmm. Yeah, funny as it may seem, I kind of came to that through a logical process. Almost, I don't know, it's getting sort of trendy now to say that you're on the spectrum, the Asperger's autism spectrum. But there was definitely some, in a way, everybody in our society is to some degree on that spectrum, to the extent that our ability to relate and our full engagement in the world has been damaged in some way. And that we all have a kind of a sensitivity that makes us uncomfortable in the world that has been presented to us to live in. So anyway, I'm not saying, but I kind of came from a place of who am I really, and what is missing? Why do I feel incomplete? And that coincided with various experiences that I was fortunate to have, where that feeling of alienation and incompleteness was temporarily met. And it was always in moments of relationship to something, to a person or to a place, to a butterfly, to something like that. So these were the pieces that kind of came together into an understanding of, oh, actually what health is, what well-being is, it is relationship, which is even kind of contained in the words health or well, which both mean whole, as in wholeness. Well, what is it actually that is whole here? What is the self? What is it that is healing? So that's, I'm not necessarily proud to say it, but I came at it from a very, very intellectual place.
Yeah. And I actually want to dive into a few things related to your recent book, The Coronation, or a collection of essays, kind of a combination of that. And this piece, I have this line that you wrote: what makes you crazy is to be an agent of your own gaslighting. So that's your quote.
Mm-hmm.
And this was in response to the backlash of you expressing during peak Corona times. And I want to hear about both that time of darkness where this statement, this what makes you crazy to be an agent of your own gaslighting, and also that turning point in how you now inhabit truth differently than you did prior, like the gift, right, of being gaslit.
Yeah. So gaslighting, I mean, the word is actually maybe overused at this time, but what it really means is when you contrive to make somebody doubt their own direct experience. Her experience is that the lights are getting dimmer and dimmer, but she's told, no, that's not happening. Your direct perceptions are erroneous. You cannot trust your direct perceptions. So during the time of COVID, I had these very gut level instinctual responses to what was going on. And like, for example, the whole idea of distancing, of locking down, of masking. I mean, these were the outplay of my nightmare of a dystopian society, of separation, where where not only are we boxed into single family homes and no longer have community and are disconnected from nature, but now we even like no longer touch each other. We no longer gather together. We accept as normal a technologically mediated social world. I was just like on a gut level, I'm like, no. And I then, so, because of that instinctive, like primal rejection of that whole direction of society, I was very receptive to any kind of research or any kind of argument that said, well, social distancing it doesn't work. Masks don't work, lockdowns don't work, the costs are higher than the benefits, et cetera, et cetera. I wasn't fully rational in my acceptance of those arguments. I was already conditioned to accept them, just as the other side was conditioned to accept the justifications for lockdown, because their basic value system and their basic mythology of progress says that progress comes through greater and greater application of technology to life. And the conquest, this is the next step in the conquest of the microbial world. So I became, okay, so that was the situation. And when I began to voice these doubts and these protests, people got very upset and offered me some very valid questions, like, Charles, how can you be sure that you're not actually killing people by getting them to not take social distancing seriously? Do you know for sure? What is your evidence here? Ultimately, the evidence was secondary. And in the end, actually, it turned out that my viewpoint was scientifically correct. Back at the time, it was said that transmission happened through droplets from coughing and sneezing and from hand contact with things. Ultimately, that turned out not to be true. It turns out that it's aerosolized particles that are not limited to 6 feet, when you cough or sneeze, et cetera. I mean, I'm not going to go through all of the evidence here, but ultimately it turned out that my prejudice against masks and social distancing and lockdown was actually happened to correspond to the facts. But at the time, I didn't know that, So anyway, I went through this process of really deep doubt, and because of the social pressure and the bullying, and the appearance that I was a minority of almost one, part of me was like, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's nothing wrong with distancing and masking. And I never said, well, they're right, but this doubt began to eat away at me. Also, the question, who are you to doubt the established consensus scientific viewpoint? Here you're picking on some fringe studies that the scientific establishment hasn't accepted them. So why do you accept them? Do you know more than they do? How do you know not to trust the science? And that was such a strong, such a loud voice that for a time I can't say that I rejected, but I didn't fully stand in my numerous direct experiences in my own life of events that blatantly contradict what science says is possible. And even, healings that I've witnessed and experienced and read about, like in book after book after book, of healings of conditions that were medically incurable, that violated basic principles of medical science. Like, what happens to all of those? So this was the gaslighting, was to throw all of that out the window, from my direct experience to my deeply held convictions to my values, my valuing of hugs and handshakes and seeing each other's beautiful faces and gathering together to sing, and to believe that even if that does cause marginally more deaths, it's worth it. Not because it's worth it for me to have my freedom so that other people suffer, but even if I'm sacrificing my own life. Like I wrote that in my initial essay on, the coronation. I said, if you could save your life by decreeing that no one on earth ever hug again, would you do that? Is that worth it to save your own life? Most people would say no. So I'm like, well, why then are we collectively making that decision?
Mm.
And so this, I don't know, I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but that was the process of doubt that I went through, which started out as like a very rational, healthy doubt. Okay, let's really look at the source of my beliefs. But it turned into a very toxic doubt where I began to doubt my deep convictions and direct experiences.
Mm-hmm. So now, how are you inhabiting that experience now of knowing that you have to trust there's value to trusting your firsthand experience? Like, well, what's come of it? What's been the current iteration of you now, post gaslit?
Yeah, it's carried over into other areas of my life. For example, the way that I make choices about how to spend my time, what invitations to respond to, for example. There's like a rational layer that says, well, of course I want to respond to the invitation that is going to give me the biggest audience, that's going to, like, there's all these rational reasons why I would choose X rather than Y. But sometimes there's just a feeling that is completely counter to my rational explanations. And often not counter. Often it's aligned with my rational explanations, but sometimes it isn't. And this experience of really having to go deep into self-trust has strengthened that pipeline to my self-trust. And I feel much more able to make choices that I can't justify.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I'm thinking of what you're sharing. I've seen all of these people recover from diseases that they shouldn't have been able to recover from like a spiritual perspective, or, it goes against science. What are your thoughts in terms of the correlation between this kind of self-protection in this time, once again, in like the height of Corona, but this still present in our current culture, this commitment to kind of spirituality being an immature version of the physical? We're always like in this place of, if it's the spiritual, which to me is also the imaginative, the unseen, anything in that realm, it's an immature version of when it actually manifests in the physical. And I'm wondering if you see a correlation between this kind of downplay of the power of spirituality and this addiction to the immortality of the physical, self-protection and body permanence. And if you see a tie between the extreme behaviors we've seen in the last couple of years, the feeling of threat, right, on self-protection.
Yeah. So fixation on health, like health obsession. I mean, the thing is, you notice like most of the health nuts actually aren't that healthy. So the fixation on health and longevity, it actually has a shadow side, but it also has a light side. The shadow side is when you are disconnected from your purpose in life and you're not sure why am I even here? Then almost out of nothing else, well, I turn my attention to myself. If I'm not outward focused, if I'm not mission focused, if I'm not focused on my creative desires, if I'm not focused on what I want to give to the world, if I'm not focused on the people I love whose journey I'm part of, then what else is there besides myself? And it could be my health, my body, and doing all these supplements and all this kind of stuff. But it could also be other forms of self-improvement could, even those that we call spiritual. It's all the same mentality. And none of these things are bad. It's not bad to take care of yourself physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, but it's not for its own sake. It's because that is part of expressing yourself and fulfilling your purpose for being here. So it's a means to be able to do that, to be able to do that. The problem comes when it's no longer a means, but it becomes an end. And it never actually succeeds when it becomes an end, because on a soul level, we only create the amount of health and well-being that is necessary to do what we are doing. So if you're not expressing yourself and expressing your purpose, which could be some grand thing, it could be some small thing, it could be to raise children in a beautiful way, for example. It could be to beautify the small place where you are. It could be a combination of many things. But if you're not connected to that, then your soul is like, well, I have no reason to be healthy. I have no reason to summon and transmit through myself the life force. So I become less and less alive because I am I become disconnected from my life purpose, so I become less and less alive. It's totally logical on the soul level. So the word spiritual can mean a lot of different things. And in the sense you're using it, it kind of speaks to the things that we exile from practicality, the things that we discard, the things that are actually very sacred and important, but that we don't allow in. And so a spiritual practice in that sense turns toward the things that have been left out and brings back the neglected parts of life and parts of ourselves, even like the scientifically neglected, the things that can't be measured and quantified, the things that are not recognized as real by the dominant narratives. Like spirituality includes those things and brings them back in. And the shadow side is that we escape from materiality into the spiritual. But here again, as incarnate beings, the purpose of spiritual practice is to be more effective and more complete in materiality. That's why it's called a spiritual practice. It's practice for materiality, because this is where we are right now. And we have tremendous opportunities that exist nowhere else. Nowhere else can you build something beautiful from stone. Nowhere else can you plant a garden. I mean, we're surrounded by other life here. It's in this incredible material playground. So it is kind of a betrayal of our incarnation to repudiate all of those things and escape into the spiritual plane. So there's two sides of that as well. And again, it's when spirituality becomes an end rather than a means that it turns dark.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like you've probably learned a lot from what you were sharing earlier, just even about the dark period into the more self-trusting period. Have you learned certain ways of communicating in the last few years where you're able to both listen to differing opinions and also share with people that have differing opinions? Are there like some ways you found to be in that?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of tips and skills and things like that. Like, for example, the effective use of humor, being sensitive when to speak and when not, the power of attentive listening and all those kind of things. But it's not actually so much a matter of skills and tips and tricks and things like that. It's much more a matter of clarity in myself and connection and being firmly anchored to what I know and to recognize what I don't know. And when I don't gaslight myself and I am solid in what I know and I know that I know it, and I'm just really clear on that, then paradoxically, I actually have less need to try to convince others of it. because a lot of what's going on when people are always trying to convince other people of their position is that they're actually not fully solid in it themselves. When you're fully solid in it, then you don't really need to get the confirmation of others. Like a lot of that is, I'm right, aren't I? Aren't I? Well, I don't need to do that so much anymore. So I don't have an agenda of getting people to reflect back at me what I know to be true. Instead, I can hold that place of truth and carry it kind of as an offering in readiness, where if I do sense like some kind of opening, some kind of receptivity, maybe I'll say something, but not as a way to conquer that person or to convert that person, but more as a friend. Oh, you are impatient at the confines of your worldview. You're grappling with contradictions. Here's something that might be helpful to you. In that spirit. Trusting that each person goes through a natural, organic growth process where when they have grown up against the limits of a certain belief system, it becomes confining, and the time has come maybe to molt, to step into a bigger skin. And maybe that's the time where I might offer an alternative narrative, or I might confirm a doubt that they are sensing but haven't been able to express yet. So it's really like, it is the attitude of a friend, not an adversary. And that is possible when I've gone through this internal inventory of my beliefs and where do they come from and what beliefs are part of who I am fundamentally. And that's the solidity that gives me the patience, and not all the time, okay, but when I am connected with my deep knowing, then I become much less evangelical about it and much more able to offer what is needed at that moment for that person, because I don't need them to change. I trust their ripening process. And I trust that their set of beliefs has been magnetized to them according to their state of being, according to the life experiences that they need to have right now. And when those are ready to change, I'm here as an agent of that change. Plus, the other way doesn't work. You can't, everyone's tried this, to forcefully convince somebody with an array of evidence and powerful arguments that to change their mind. Rarely does that work.
And I guess on that front, what are your thoughts in terms of, there's a sense of deep threat when people are not choosing to do things the way, specifically around the body, I want to ask you about, because we've had some extreme rulings that have happened this year, Roe versus Wade, and these kinds of things that are like perpetually an issue, right, over history. This isn't a new thing. Ultimately, if people were to have control of everybody's body and what they do with their body, what is the ultimate desire of that? Like, why is there such a longing to have control over people's bodies and what they do with them?
I think there's different tributaries to this river of domination. Part of it is the paradigm of control generally, which measures human progress by our increasing capacity to control the world outside of ourselves. The idea that if we could only control the wind and the rain and the bacteria and the soil and the genes, and then we would live in paradise. By the same token, if we could control the actions of every person and incentivize them or threaten them into behavior that maximizes the greatest good for the greatest number, then we would live in a social paradise. That's the thing that's hard to understand when you look at, the Great Reset, and central bank digital currencies and all of these, smart homes, smart meters, all these ways to minutely surveil and record the action of every person at all times, every transaction, every posting to social media, every conversation, which is, it could very well be that this conversation right now is being monitored by my phone sitting over there. Like, I don't know what is running in the background. So that, it seems really nefarious and evil, but if you are immersed in the mythology of creating paradise through controlling everything and everyone, then it's totally natural. There's no malignancy in that ambition. Ultimately, it's a delusion about the nature of the universe and our role in it. But it seems quite natural that we're going to engineer a better society. Like, how do you engineer something? You have to measure it. You have to measure all the forces involved, and you have to make a plan and then enforce that plan. So the controlling of other people's bodies fits very much to that ambition. Mm. And then there's also, I guess, issues of identity and belonging and a loss of power and relationship that gives people a hunger to dominate others because we don't feel at home here. When people experience a profound loss of control, say as a child, maybe they're traumatized and abused. Very often, as everybody knows, they grew up to be very controlling and abusive themselves. So this is the almost universal state of human beings in modern society, even if we haven't been directly abused by, an adult when we were children, or by a spouse, or by some individual abusive person. Like, the entire system commits this diffuse, unremitting abuse, actually, that is totally normalized. That gives us feelings of powerlessness and disconnection and alienation. Like, for example, I think it's abuse to take a little baby and give it to like a totally new caregiver in daycare for 8 hours or 9 or 10 hours a day with no explanation, and then among other kids, like the babies they've never seen before, in an indoor environment. And then 3 months later, you take them out of that daycare and put them into another one, and then another one the next year, and then kindergarten, it's another one, and then first grade is another one. And like these ties, like the baby naturally forms ties with this person who's holding her and loving her and changing her diapers and feeding her. And then those ties are severed. And that happens again and again and again. I remember how bewildering it was to go to kindergarten and distressful, but that's totally normalized. And I'm not blaming. See, here's a pattern, is to find the person to blame. That is part of our programming. It's not the fault of the parents who put them in daycare. They live in a system that gives them almost no choice. This is, as long as we seek as long as we see blame as the key to unlock all of our problems and to right every wrong, we're always going to be trapped, because that prevents us from seeing the big picture when we're focused on whose fault is it. Okay, so this normalized trauma generates feelings of powerlessness, alienation, loss of control, that then feeds a control-based society where, like, say, if the problem is abortion, then the solution, the blame is, well, it's these, mothers, and then we have to stop them from doing that. But and that fixation prevents us from seeing, okay, what is it about our entire society that overrides the biological instinct to have and love children? I mean, naturally, we love babies. So where is anybody asking, like in nature, sometimes a mammal will eat her own young, or like absorb her own young back into her body if conditions aren't right to raise a litter. Rabbits do this, like all kinds of animals do this. Unhospitable to raising a family, that an animal will abort the pregnancy. No, I'll try later, try another litter next time. Well, we could ask the same thing. What is it about our society that is so anti-life? I mean, this is maybe, the pro-life, pro-choice, like, well, our whole society is in a way anti-life. Like, why do you have to send your kids to daycare? Why are children such a burden? Why isn't the value system of the whole society gathered around life? Why aren't mothers and parents generally, but especially mothers, celebrated and supported and given like every kind of support and every kind of status? Why aren't they the highest status people? Why are they low status and economically abandoned unless they go out and get a job? Like, those are the questions we have to be asking. And those are the questions that the blame mentality, that the victim mentality, that the carryover from alienating trauma that leads to the desire to control obscures. Those we never look at those bigger questions. And instead we are incinerating all of our political energy fighting each other. Blame, 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 blame. And I guess I'm saying this because I hope that by illuminating these dynamics, we might be able to transcend them.
Yeah. And in terms of growth economy and the relationship between, for instance, what you just mentioned, mothers being not appreciated, right, because they're not contributing in a way, or this against life, it feels like growth economy is the antithesis to living. It doesn't provide that space, even though all of our necessities are taken care of, barely anybody has time to live in modern life. Growth economy just feels like a given. It feels like this massive beast, that the possibility of not being a part of growth economy feels like the death sentence for many people. Like, if I'm not on that track, I'm going to get behind, and then I'm not going to have savings and all the kinds of worries. I know you've been a degrowth theorist and you've been a proponent of other possibilities. And I'm wondering, would you share some convincing arguments of other possibilities besides growth economy? Like, what does that look like, and how would someone engage?
Yeah, we have to understand what growth economy actually means. In economics, it means growth in the volume of goods and services that are exchanged for money. So if someone had been a stay-at-home mom and then instead sends the child to daycare and goes out and gets a job, that creates economic growth. A good and service called daycare is being purchased, and the mother's labor, instead of going to take care of the baby, now goes toward inputting data in an office somewhere, and that's a service also. So the GDP goes up when this happens. But is anything new actually created here? What's, now a stranger is taking care of the baby, not the mother. But the child, is so basically, when the mother's taking care of the child, playing patty cake, reading her books, taking her to the playground, no one is paying for those services. So they're not part of the economy. When a daycare center does that, then they can go to a bank, they can get a business loan, they can say, here's how we're going to make a profit. Like, it allows capital investment. It allows the economy to continue to function. It allows economic growth. And we've seen over the last, well, let's just say 2 generations, a very rapid migration of more and more intimate aspects of life into the economy. But are we better off when most cooking is done in supermarket delis and restaurants instead of in the kitchen? Are we better off when children are being supervised all day instead of playing pickup games and running around the neighborhood, playing hopscotch and jacks and cops and robbers and tag? Are we better off then? Are we better off when you pay contractors to do all of your yard work rather than doing it yourself, or neighbors helping neighbors do it outside the money economy? So a lot of economic growth, it doesn't mean that more is being done necessarily. It means that it is part of a money transaction instead of a gift economy. I'm not sure how much I want to go into economic theory here, but the justification for it is that it's much more efficient for a few daycare center workers to take care of 30 kids than for every mom to do it themselves. Therefore, and it's more efficient for the mom to do her specialized function in the economy, so that then she'll have more leisure time because the work of child caring is being done more efficiently. Well, that leaves out all of the things that cannot be contained in efficiency, which is everything qualitative. Like, yeah, it is maybe more efficient for a few daycare workers to change all the diapers and to feed the children and do all these things that you can quantify. But can you pay them to actually love the children? Can you buy that? To actually be patient, actually take the time, actually connect authentically to them, to actually care? No. And that's the kind of thing that we lose in the world of economic growth. We lose the things that actually make life precious, that make it intimate. When you outsource intimate functions like cooking and taking care of children to strangers. And I would add to that singing together. Like, that's another thing that's become a paid service or a product. Whereas if you spend time in less developed parts of the world, you notice people sing a lot more. We used to make our own songs. Even in, Ireland, if you go especially to the more rural parts, in the pubs, what do people do? They sing. We used to sing on the school bus, actually, but now everybody's on their device. So this is what we have to understand what economic growth is. Now we have an economy that only works when there is economic growth, which is why I, spent some part of my life writing about economics. I wrote a book called Sacred Economics that asks, okay, what is it about our money system that makes it only function in a context of growth, which means more and more of life entering the realm of services, more and more of nature entering the realm of commodities and products. Like, that doesn't make us better off. We are not happier or healthier as a society than we were 50 years ago or 70 years ago, when per capita GDP was a third of what it is today. Are we 3 times happier? No. Economic growth does not deliver the promise that is encoded in the word goods. More and more goods, but that's not more and more good.
So much in there. It's also tough, right? Like, because the system, the reference to child's care, we used to have communities where other people would also help with children. It wasn't just on the mother or the father.
Right.
And that's it's a loss, I think, even going back to the term belonging. belonging was interwoven into our societies not long ago. Like we didn't have to think about how to belong. And now you actually have to make the commitment of like, how am I actually going to belong in my community? And what does that entail? How do I actually reweave that? So if I do choose to stay at home with my children, I have a web of other people. There's the burden of both not belonging and the burden of how do I actually make these changes so I can be available to my family or my communities in the way I want, where it's not all on me, right? Where there is like a
Right.
larger holding. And I'm wondering what you've seen in terms of
Yeah.
reweaving those webs, right? And starting to not feel like it's all on you.
Yeah, it's not easy. This isn't the fault of the parents, because if you say, okay, I'm not gonna put them in daycare, as you're saying, well, what's left? It's not like we have a huge extended family living in the neighborhood, aunts and uncles and grannies and close friends who will collectively look after the children, and packs of kids ranging across different ages that look out for each other. Like we even had a bit of that when I was a kid. It was starting to disappear. A lot of kids weren't outside. They were watching the television indoors instead, but there was still kind of a collective life, a community. And when that evaporates, like you can send your kids outside, but there's not a kingdom of childhood out there waiting for them. There's not a vibrant social life waiting for them. So what are you going to do? Are you going to be their friend? Are you going to be their playmate? You can, but it's a sacrifice because you're an adult and you want to also use your gifts for other purposes. And so you send them to daycare. So that is kind of a symptom of the loss of community. And if there's no community, then, it might actually be better for them. At least they're, with some other kids. At least they have some playtime during the day. Might be, if that, that's maybe the best choice. So as you were saying, like that brings us to, okay, how can we create the larger conditions for beautiful childhood, beautiful life, where it's not just dependent on the efforts of the parents or parent in the single family box. Like once you have it set up like that, then you need actually money to live a decent life. When all of the things that were once sourced from community are no longer available from community, you have to source them from somewhere. And either it's your own reserves or it's what you pay people to do. So that's the larger situation. And how do we return to a healthy society where we're connected to each other again? It's a long journey. And I don't have a shortcut to that. But I know that when we hold that as important and sacred, even when we hold children being at home among other children in freedom in the outdoors, when we hold that sacred, then at least we have a lodestar to navigate our choices by.
And in terms of gift economy, I've been inspired by your trust and willingness. You're someone who has a few kids. You have people that depend on you. And I'm wondering how the gift economy, how you're working with it right now in your business and work life, if you're willing to share, if it's not too private.
It's more of yeah, I would say it's more of trusting the principle of the gift. We don't really have a gift economy right now in developed societies, but we can take steps toward the gift economy. And it starts with embracing the principle of gift, which basically recognizes that ultimately everything is a gift. Our lives are a gift. Our breath is a gift. We didn't earn it. We didn't earn the sun. We didn't earn the water. We didn't earn nature. We didn't earn the soil. So ultimately, but even our very lives. We didn't earn our mothers taking care of us, when we were helpless, utterly helpless babies. So that recognition of gift as the basic operating principle of the universe, which doesn't to say, it's not to say that we don't work hard. Giving and receiving ultimately come into balance. But to recognize that as a basic principle then motivates a desire to live by that. And to take steps toward a world that recognizes gift as fundamental and that is built on gratitude and generosity and sharing. So what that means for me is that I pretty consistently make all of my work, all of my output, my words available without charge. I don't put things behind a paywall. Even my books, you could find them online. I have them on my website. If you don't want to pay for them, my online programs, same thing. The payment is voluntary. Even in-person gatherings, usually the way I do it is if I'm the one in charge, I'll have people pay for hard costs, room and board, but the program fee, that is voluntary. And it comes through trusting, comes from why do I do that way? For one thing, if somebody can barely afford to come and it's going to come out of their grocery money, I don't want that. I don't want their money. They need it more than I do. So that's one piece. The other piece is, how can I say how valuable this will be to you? If I charge $200, what if the value for you, what if you're quite wealthy and the value to you is $5,000? Or what if you're quite wealthy and you think I've just wasted 2 days of your time and the value to you is zero? I would like to trust that, to trust the generosity and the gratitude of other people. Because when I find that when I step into that way of seeing others, I invite them into that world themselves. And I'm kind of holding a pole, a magnetic pole that coalesces the world into its orbit. Mm. And so, over the years, it's worked out so that I have been able to support and raise 4 children and to do my work through voluntary subscriptions, donations on my website, people buying my book, even though they theoretically don't have to buy it. It's worked for me. And I'm not saying everybody should do it the way I do it, but for me, that's what I've been called to do. And other people, I seriously think that, a lot of healers, they want to work by gift. And I'm like, is that really coming from gift, or is that coming because you're not valuing yourself? Mm. And so sometimes it's good to charge money and to get that over with and affirm that this is something valuable I'm offering and establish a little ritual called payment. I'm not a moralist, I'm not saying you should, you shouldn't, you should, you shouldn't, and this is the right way and this is the wrong way. All I'm saying is that my calling has been to do it this way. And that calling comes from holding the truth of the gift nature of the universe. And as others hold that truth, they might be called to do the same. They might be called to do something very different.
You seem very interested too in process. Like a lot of what you're sharing today speaks to process versus end goal too. And I've heard you say that you like to think about things that nobody's thinking about. Like if there's a problem, you like to ask the questions that nobody's asking. And And I'm wondering if you have certain methodology around that. Like, do you have a way that you get to that place of question versus conclusion in your daily life? Both in like just being around people, like being open, as well as in your own process of writing and inquiry.
Yeah, so I am interested in the forgotten questions, which no one or maybe very few people are asking. Or maybe they are asking them, but not out loud. And someone needs to say them out loud. So a lot of the recognition of the exiled questions comes from deprogramming, from stepping outside the normal paradigms, belief systems, lenses, and habits, really. It's really about habits. So I mentioned one of the habits earlier on, which was find the culprit, find the person to blame. And that's how many people reflexively respond when they face a situation of injustice or something, like, I mean, I could take the pandemic response as an example. Like, and I don't know about your audience, but I think that there was an awful lot of horrible policy that caused huge amounts of unnecessary illness and suffering. And so the habit is, who are the dastardly villains who deliberately perpetrated this crime? That's the habit. Well, if there is any other explanation, you're not going to see it if you're fixated on finding the dastardly villains. If you put down that lens, then so much more opens up to your vision that had been invisible before. And that's what I've learned to do, is to put down some of these habitual rubrics, habitual filters on reality. And then other things become obvious. And so that's just one of them. Find the villain, find the enemy. There's a lot of these cognitive filters and organizing principles that we've learned, in modern society, through our schooling, through our economy, through our education in science. A lot of them are built into science. Like one of them would be find something to measure. Find the reductive cause. Look for who's in charge. As a theory of change. Convince somebody in charge to change something. Yeah, there's. I'm not going to try to catalog all of these hidden templates and habits, but that's the basic principle. Is that then reveals questions that are not being asked.
Is it intellectual or is it more sensory based?
The intellectual part is one layer, but it's like, if you notice, like that, who's the bad guy here? There's an emotional layer to that. Like there's a feeling, justice and indignation and I'm good, I'm innocent, and they're bad, and it's not fair. Like all of that whole corpus of emotion and psychology and belief, like that is, it's actually it goes along with an injured state of being. And the organizing filter of good versus evil, of heroes and villains, of us and them, is part of a state of that injured state of being. And so when people go through various kinds of healing, then they might become much less judgmental, much less vindictive, just much less prone to seeing the world in that way. And what has happened is not purely an intellectual enlightenment where they, have gained new tools and seen through the illogic of their old story. It's that a change has happened all the way down to the bottom. And so the cognitive layer changes as well.
Yeah. Is there anything that's current for you right now, like a particular curiosity that you're immersed in?
My work goes through kind of inner and outer cycles, and right now I'm kind of, I've been in kind of an interface for the last month. Like something's fermenting that isn't really in words yet.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to talk about that.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Well, I'm so thankful for your inner and outer process and your willingness to share other possibilities. I know it's been a great gift in my life over the years, and I know many people, it makes a great impact. So thank you for your willingness to wander through all of these territories and share them with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Olivia. It did seem like we skipped around a lot, but I do feel like there's kind of a unifying thread there. So I hope people do come away with like a feeling of the conversation, that deeper layer, the feeling level, the transition that our souls are going through, that is really into a next consciousness. And everything from, economics to the way we raise children, to politics, to our relationship to the other life forms on Earth, all of that, and to our belief systems and our opinions, like all of that is part of this transition. And I would just end by expressing my gratitude that this is happening to us. And I'm very happy to be alive today.